It was an ordinary day at a high-end car dealership where the latest models were on display for wealthy clients. The showroom was pristine, the cars were immaculate, and everything appeared picture-perfect. Among the customers admiring the sleek vehicles, there was a man who stood out, wearing a mechanic's uniform, greasy and worn from long hours in the garage. His unkempt appearance was at odds with the luxurious atmosphere of the dealership, and his arrival turned heads. He wasn't there to buy a car, but to teach someone a lesson. Inside the showroom, a salesman named James stood confidently behind a pristine black BMW. He was wearing a sharp suit, the kind that matched the lavish decor of the place. James had a reputation for being arrogant and dismissive, especially when dealing with anyone he deemed to be below him. He was used to the high life, serving only the elite, and he never bothered to hide his disdain for the people who weren't worthy of buying cars like the ones displayed in front of him. "Can I help you, sir?" James asked, his tone dripping with superiority as he looked at the man in the mechanic's uniform. He wasn't used to dealing with anyone who wasn't clearly dressed for the part of a potential buyer. The man in the mechanic's outfit looked up from the BMW, his face unreadable. "I'm just looking around," he replied, his voice calm yet firm. James smirked, not bothering to offer assistance or even a genuine smile. "Well, if you're not here to buy, you might want to get out of the way. I don't have time to waste on people who can't afford the cars here." The mechanic's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing. Instead, he walked past James, his presence lingering in the air like a silent challenge. The salesman was so wrapped up in his own arrogance that he didn't even notice the slight tension in the air. He assumed the man would leave, just like anyone else who couldn't afford a luxury car. But the mechanic wasn't leaving. He was about to teach James a lesson he would never forget. The mechanic wandered through the showroom, inspecting the cars with a practiced eye. He didn't act like someone who was unfamiliar with the inner workings of automobiles. His knowledge of them was evident. Meanwhile, James continued to preen and show off his salesmanship to potential customers, smugly believing that no one could outshine him. About an hour later, as the mechanic lingered near the back of the showroom, James found himself growing impatient. The mechanic hadn't made a move toward the door, nor had he left after the snide remarks James had made earlier. James approached the man once again, this time with an attitude more dismissive than before. "All right, buddy, I don't know what you're still doing here," James said, approaching the mechanic with a sneer. "You don't belong here. You should be working in a garage somewhere, not bothering people who are here to actually spend money." The mechanic glanced up at James, his expression still calm. "I think you've misunderstood, James," he said quietly. James looked surprised. "How do you know my name?" "I know a lot of things, James. You should be careful how you treat people," the mechanic replied, his voice carrying an undertone of authority. James laughed dismissively. "Oh, really? What are you going to do about it? You're just a mechanic. What could you possibly know about running a business like this?" The mechanic's eyes hardened, and for the first time, he spoke with clear authority. "I'm the one who owns this dealership, James. I'm the CEO." The words hit like a thunderclap. James stared at the mechanic, disbelief etched across his face. For a moment, he couldn't process what he had just heard. This greasy, unkempt man who he had belittled and dismissed as beneath him was the CEO of the very company he worked for? The mechanic smiled slightly, knowing that the moment of truth had arrived. "My name is Greg Peterson," the man said, his tone no longer quiet. "I am the CEO of this dealership, and I've been observing you all day. I've seen the way you treat people, especially those who don't look like they belong in your precious showroom." James's face flushed with embarrassment, but his pride refused to let him admit fault. "This is some kind of joke, right? You're not serious?" Greg smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "Oh, I'm very serious, James. And the joke is on you. You see, I didn't come here today just to see how you interact with customers. I came here to teach you a lesson in humility and respect." James was too stunned to respond. He opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Greg took a step closer, towering over James with an aura of authority. "I built this dealership from the ground up, and I've made it my mission to ensure that every customer, no matter who they are, feels welcome here. But you? You've made it clear you have no respect for anyone who isn't dressed in a suit or doesn't fit your narrow idea of who should be allowed in this showroom. That ends today." Greg's words hit James harder than he cared to admit. For a brief moment, he found himself speechless. His mind raced, trying to wrap around the idea that the very person he had mocked was the one who held all the power in this situation. But his ego refused to be fully crushed. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing here," James spat, trying to regain some composure. "But I'm not scared of you. I've been working here for years. You think you can come in and just think I'm playing a game?" Greg interrupted, his voice unwavering. "No, James. I'm not here to play. I'm here because I care about my business, and I care about the people who represent it." James sneered, unwilling to let go of his arrogance. "So, what are you going to do, fire me? I'm the best salesman this dealership has ever had." Greg didn't flinch. "You may be good at selling cars, James, but you're terrible at representing this company. You have no respect for people, whether they're customers or employees, and that's why you need to go." The words hung in the air, thick with finality. James took a step back, shocked. "You can't just fire me. You don't have that right." "I do," Greg said calmly, "and I just did." Before James could protest further, Greg raised his hand, signaling one of the other managers in the showroom. "Tom," Greg called, and the manager, who had been silently observing the interaction, walked over. "Please escort Mr. James out of the dealership. Effective immediately. He's no longer employed here." Tom nodded, and with a look of sympathy for James, he gestured for him to follow. "This is ridiculous!" James yelled, but it was clear his words had lost all meaning. The arrogance that once defined him seemed to melt away as reality set in. Greg turned to face the rest of the showroom, his voice addressing the employees and customers who had witnessed the exchange. "To everyone here, I want you to understand something. It's not enough to be good at your job. You have to respect the people you work with, the customers you serve, and the values that this business is built on. I won't tolerate anyone who disrespects that." The tension in the showroom lingered for a few moments after James was escorted out. The employees were still in shock, unsure of how to process what had just happened. The customers who had witnessed the scene exchanged confused glances, unsure whether this was just another corporate drama or something much deeper. Greg stepped up to the front of the showroom, his gaze sweeping across the room. There was no arrogance in his demeanor, just quiet authority. "This dealership isn't just about cars," he continued, his voice steady. "It's about the people. It's about the trust we build with our customers and with each other. I want everyone who works here to remember that. From this point forward, we'll focus not just on sales, but on creating an environment of respect, humility, and honesty. We're in this together, and we'll all rise or fall together." The employees began to nod, some of them smiling in relief. They could already feel the shift in the atmosphere. Greg wasn't just a CEO in a suit. He was a leader who genuinely cared about the people who worked for him and the reputation of his company. As the customers continued to browse the showroom, Greg walked to the back, where one of his trusted managers, Tom, was waiting for him. Tom, who had witnessed the entire confrontation, was already on his phone, making arrangements for the necessary changes. "Thank you for handling that," Greg said with a nod. "No problem," Tom replied. "It's been a long time coming. I've seen James treat people poorly for far too long. He had it coming." Greg smiled, his expression now softening. I know. But it wasn't just about firing him. It was about making sure this place becomes what it was meant to be. A place where everyone feels welcome, respected, and valued. Tom smiled back. I think we're on the right track. James, meanwhile, had been escorted out of the building, seething with rage. His pride had taken a major blow, and he couldn't fathom how things had escalated so quickly. But as he sat in his car, parked on the side of the road, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from his ex-wife. James, I heard what happened today. You're no longer with the dealership. Do you know what this means for us? James looked at the message, a wave of realization washing over him. His career, his arrogance, and his unwillingness to listen had cost him everything. For the first time, he felt the weight of his actions. Inside the dealership, the employees were already shifting their focus, eager to prove that they could live up to the new expectations Greg had set. The arrogant salesman was gone, and a sense of hope filled the air, a new beginning for the dealership. Greg stood in the showroom, watching as customers happily browsed the cars. He knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but it was the road he had chosen. The road that prioritized respect, fairness, and a commitment to doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. As the sun set outside, the showroom continued to hum with activity, a testament to the changes that were already taking root. Greg smiled, knowing he had done the right thing.